What kind of person gets shot in the chest and then talks for over an hour? No, not that guy. There we go. Meet Theodore Roosevelt, the bull moose president himself. We could talk for hours about how much of a badass this man was, including being the namesake of the teddy bear. But I want to take a few minutes to tell you a story that encapsulates his extraordinary life in one single event. On a cool October day in 1912, a restless crowd clusters outside Milwaukee's Gilpatrick Hotel, eyes fixed on the doors, hearts pounding with anticipation. They're here to see the bull moose himself, Theodore Roosevelt, a beloved war hero, ex-president, and now a presidential candidate once again. Enthusiasm ripples through the evening air as onlookers crane their necks and peer over the shoulders of others, each hoping for the best view. Suddenly, the front doors of the hotel swing open to a roar of cheers from the excited onlookers. Theodore Roosevelt then appears before them, hat in hand, his trademark grin lighting up the sidewalk as he waves his hat in the air. The flashbulbs pop as members of the press file for a photograph of the former president, and the crowd noise intensifies as admirers surge closer. He waves warmly, radiating the energy of a man poised for another stint in the White House. Yet from behind that swell of excitement, the lone stranger steps forward. A hush seems to fall around him as he raises the arm once firmly clenched in his pocket, eyes locked on the former president. Time would hang in the air for one electrifying second, then... Welcome back to Compelling History. Today, I'm excited to share the story of one of the most badass presidents in United States history, Theodore Roosevelt. During a campaign event in the 1912 election, Roosevelt survived an assassination attempt by a local lunatic who believed he was following the commands of a former president's ghost. Remarkably, Roosevelt went on to deliver a speech lasting over an hour, all while his own blood pooled on the stage beneath him. How could a man take a bullet to the chest and still address the crowd? What does it really take to stop a bull moose? If you're new here, my name is Jonathan, and I release weekly videos exploring fascinating events, places, and people from history. In my previous video, I covered the rapid downfall of the Hindenburg. Other videos on the channel dive into topics like the tragic bombing of Pan Am Flight 103, the life of Sam Cooke, and the history of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I started this channel because I love learning about history and sharing what I've discovered with others. If there's a topic you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy it, and don't forget to subscribe if you're as passionate about history as I am. You won't want to miss out on future videos I have coming up. Now, with all that out of the way, let's jump into the video. He could have walked away from politics as one of the most popular presidents in American history, but after years of watching from the sidelines, Theodore Roosevelt felt he had no choice but to return, not just to run for president, but to fight for what he believed was stolen from him. What drove Roosevelt to re-enter the fray and challenge the man he once trusted? The story of Theodore Roosevelt's return to politics in 1912 starts with his departure from it. In 1908, Roosevelt stood at the height of his popularity. His presidency, launched unexpectedly in 1901 after the assassination of William McKinley, had transformed the nation. McKinley had been shot by an anarchist, Leon Czolgosz, while attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. Despite initial hopes for recovery, McKinley died of gangrene 8 days later, propelling Roosevelt into the presidency at just 42 years old. Roosevelt wasted no time in shaping the office to reflect his bold, energetic style. His policies, often described as progressive, targeted monopolies, preserved public lands, and sought to regulate industries that he believed posed threats to the common American. Roosevelt earned a reputation as a trust buster, overseeing antitrust prosecutions and regulatory reforms that curbed corporate excesses. His square deal aimed to balance the interests of business, labor, and consumers, laying the foundation for modern regulatory governance. By the end of his second term, Roosevelt would even dramatically expand national parks and forests before eventually establishing the Food and Drug Administration to safeguard public health. Despite his success, Roosevelt made a surprising choice. He declined to seek another term. At this point in American history, there were no term limits for presidents. However, presidents would typically adhere to the two-term precedent set by George Washington. Although Roosevelt was technically eligible for another full term, he wished to honor the tradition set by the nation's first president. In addition to this tradition, Roosevelt's decision was also rooted in his belief in the importance of limiting executive power to prevent dictatorship. Instead, he threw his support behind his Secretary of War, William Howard Taft, believing Taft would carry forward the progressive torch. After getting elected, however, Taft's presidency would diverge from Roosevelt's vision. Where Roosevelt had relished confrontation with business interests, Taft's more conservative approach favored compromise and legalistic solutions. Taft was not as eager to challenge monopolies or expand executive power. This conservative bent alienated many progressives, including Roosevelt, who watched with growing frustration as Taft signed tariffs Roosevelt opposed and dismissed Gifford Pinchot, a key figure in Roosevelt's conservation movement. The rift between Roosevelt and Taft deepened early in Taft's presidency. Roosevelt took offense on the night of Taft's election when Taft credited his success to his half-brother Charles P. Taft, rather than attributing it to Roosevelt's endorsement. The divide grew wider as Taft favored conservative allies and refused to consult Roosevelt on key cabinet appointments. The breaking point came in 1911 when Taft's Justice Department filed an antitrust lawsuit against U.S. Steel, an acquisition Roosevelt had personally approved during his presidency. Roosevelt viewed this as a personal betrayal. By the time the 1912 election approached, the split between Roosevelt and Taft was undeniable. Roosevelt, convinced that Taft had strayed from the progressive cause, decided to challenge him for the Republican nomination. However, the Republican National Convention, dominated by the party's conservative wing, sided with Taft, denying Roosevelt the nomination. Unwilling to step aside, Roosevelt broke from the party and formed his own political party, the Progressive Party. Roosevelt's campaign would take on an almost mythical quality, declaring he felt as fit as a bull moose, leading the party to soon adopt the nickname the Bull Moose Party. His platform championed direct democracy, women's suffrage, and increased regulation of industry, a bold and ambitious vision for the early 20th century that would expand upon his earlier reforms. The election of 1912 quickly became a three-way contest between Roosevelt, Taft, and the Democratic nominee, Woodrow Wilson. Roosevelt toured the country relentlessly, delivering fiery speeches and galvanizing crowds with his characteristic energy. While he drew large followings, the division within the Republican Party all but assured victory for Wilson. October 14, 1912, was a brisk day in Milwaukee. Theodore Roosevelt arrived in town ahead of a campaign speech, already well into his bid for a third term. The city streets bustled with excitement, and Roosevelt, ever the showman, thrived on the energy. That afternoon, he met with supporters, attended a brief luncheon, and then made his way to the Gilpatrick Hotel for a private dinner hosted by the hotel's owner, a devoted supporter. John Schrank, an out-of-work bartender from New York, had been waiting for this moment. For weeks, he had trailed Roosevelt's campaign across the country, convinced that the former president's bid for a third term endangered the republic. Schrank had borrowed money to purchase a .38 caliber Colt revolver and followed Roosevelt's stops from New Orleans to Milwaukee. Earlier that day, Schrank arrived at the Gilpatrick Hotel, blending into the crowd gathering outside. As Roosevelt dined, Schrank lingered at a nearby bar, nursing a drink and keeping watch. Roosevelt's personal security was thin by modern standards. In the absence of Secret Service protection, he relied on a small team of trusted aides and political allies to guard him. Cecil Lyon, a Texas Republican and frequent hunting companion, led the effort, often carrying a semi-automatic pistol. Elbert Martin and James Amos, both imposing figures with backgrounds in law and athletics, flanked Roosevelt at public appearances. Alfred O. Girard, a former Rough Rider, had joined the team just hours earlier, boarding the campaign train in Racine. As dusk settled, Roosevelt emerged from the hotel, waving to the gathered crowd. He climbed into the open-air car slowly, tipping his hat to the sea of faces. Schrank waited, concealed among the crowd. As Roosevelt stood in his car to acknowledge supporters, Schrank saw his chance and pressed forward, raising his revolver as he approached the car. A single shot cracked through the evening air. The bullet pierced Roosevelt's overcoat, a folded 50-page manuscript of his speech, his steel eyeglasses case, and lodged in his chest. Roosevelt staggered, gripping the side of the car as his knees buckled. He coughed forcefully, noting with relief that no blood appeared, an old hunter's trick to check if a lung had been punctured. Drawing on years of hunting experience, Roosevelt quickly deduced that the bullet had likely stopped short of anything vital. Elbert Martin lunged at Schrank, tackling him to the ground. Girard joined the fray, wresting the gun from Schrank's grasp. A bystander, Frank Laskowski, pinned Schrank's arms as the crowd erupted in shouts of, "Lynch him!" Roosevelt straightened. Blood seeped into his shirt, but his voice cut through the chaos. "Don't hurt him," he commanded. As Martin hauled Schrank to his feet, Roosevelt stepped down from the car, peering into the would-be assassin's face. "What did you do it for?" he asked calmly. Schrank did not answer. Roosevelt brushed aside his aide's pleas for medical attention. "I'm fine," he insisted, a wry smile playing at his lips. Arriving at the Milwaukee auditorium, Roosevelt entered through a side door and allowed doctors to examine him briefly. The bleeding had slowed, and the bullet appeared to be lodged in his rib cage, but Roosevelt refused to cancel the address. Minutes later, he took the stage, gripping the manuscript bearing the hole from Schrank's revolver. "Friends, I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible," Roosevelt began, his voice unwavering. "I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot." The audience gasped as Roosevelt unbuttoned his vest, revealing his blood-stained shirt. "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose," he quipped, drawing cheers. For the next hour and a half, Roosevelt delivered his speech in full, his breath short but steady. By the end of the evening, he finally relented, allowing his aides to take him to the hospital. The bullet that tore through Theodore Roosevelt's chest was meant to do more than stop a presidential campaign, at least according to John Schrank. Schrank, a Bavarian-born saloon keeper from New York, had spent years drifting along the East Coast after the deaths of his family and girlfriend Emily Ziegler, who perished in the General Slocum disaster. Profoundly religious and plagued by grief, Schrank claimed to have had a vision in 1901, shortly after President William McKinley's assassination. In this dream, McKinley's ghost rose from his casket, urging Schrank to avenge his death, pointing an accusatory finger at Theodore Roosevelt. When Roosevelt announced his bid for a third term in 1912, Schrank interpreted the vision as divine instruction to prevent Roosevelt from becoming a dictator. Convinced that Roosevelt orchestrated McKinley's murder and posed a threat to democracy, Schrank stalked the former president for weeks, following him across 8 states. After the attempted assassination, Schrank was apprehended at the scene and later subjected to psychological evaluation. He confessed freely, citing his belief that Roosevelt's third-term bid violated the unwritten laws of the United States. Doctors diagnosed Schrank with paranoid schizophrenia, noting his grandiose delusions and religious hallucinations. In November 1912, a court-appointed sanity commission found Schrank legally insane, declaring him unfit to stand trial. He was committed to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Waupun, Wisconsin, where he spent the next 31 years until his death from pneumonia in 1943. During his incarceration, Schrank remained polite and cooperative, but unwavering in his belief that he had saved the nation. Meanwhile, Roosevelt's recovery was as unconventional as his character. True to his larger-than-life persona, only after speaking for nearly an hour did he agree to seek medical attention. Roosevelt was taken to Johnston Emergency Hospital, where doctors examined him and concluded the bullet had lodged in his chest muscle and therefore was too dangerous to remove. He was transferred to Mercy Hospital in Chicago, remaining under observation for 6 days while his wife, Edith Roosevelt, monitored his care. Roosevelt often joked that he was more boss-ruled by his wife during his recovery than by political opponents. Despite the injury, Roosevelt pressed on with his campaign, determined to challenge Wilson and Taft. However, the physical toll of the shooting and the exhaustive campaign left Roosevelt fatigued. In the end, the 1912 election saw Wilson secure a decisive victory, with Roosevelt splitting the Republican vote and finishing second. Roosevelt garnered 27% of the popular vote and 88 electoral votes, the most successful third-party candidate in U.S. history, but it was not enough to claim the presidency. The bullet remained in Roosevelt's chest for the rest of his life, a constant reminder of both his mortality and his resilience. As for Schrank, his life after the assassination attempt faded into obscurity. He lived quietly in the asylum, receiving no visitors or mail during his decades of incarceration. When Franklin D. Roosevelt won an unprecedented third term in 1940, Schrank reportedly remarked that he would have interfered if he were not confined. In death, his body was donated to medical science, closing the final chapter of a life that intersected briefly and violently with one of the most enduring figures in American history. While a bullet wasn't enough to kill a bull moose, a pulmonary embolism was. Roosevelt would die 7 years after the attempted assassination we talked about today. Upon receiving word of his death, Vice President Thomas R. Marshall said that death had to take Roosevelt sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight. Thank you so much for sticking around until the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed learning about this part of Theodore Roosevelt's life as much as I have. If you did, I recommend you check out Extra History's series, Teddy Roosevelt, the Trustbuster. Their series dives more into Roosevelt's policies throughout his presidency and how he got the name Trustbuster. You could also check out Weird History's video exploring hardcore facts about Teddy Roosevelt if that's more your thing. I found both of these very interesting and distracting at times while making this video. Also, I know how at the start of the video I mentioned he was the namesake for the teddy bear, but he actually hated being called Teddy. He much preferred to be called the Colonel, or just TR. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video and want to explore more historical people, places, and events, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. We'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment below to let us know which topics you'd like us to feature in future episodes. Your support makes this channel possible, and we're excited to continue sharing incredible stories with you.